This is a nonfiction reading for We Must Remember. I have numbered the paragraphs, and it is annotated, meaning there are notes provided within those paragraphs, things underlined, things highlighted, that will help with future assignments. So we must remember, soon there will be no one left alive who personally lived through the Holocaust. So it becomes even more important to remember those terrible years and how they began, and to remember how cruelty, hatred, and discrimination led to violence, death, and destruction. That's from Norman Finkelstein, Remember Not to Forget, A Memory of the Holocaust. When we speak of the Holocaust, we utter the unspeakable. When we think of the Holocaust, we acknowledge the unimaginable. Yet this is a chapter of our history that must be told, so people of conscience will never let the horror happen again. The Holocaust is more than the story of the 6 million Jews who perished in the death camps. It is more than the story of the destruction of political prisoners and those who did not follow Nazi ideas. It is the story of brutality and savagery. The Holocaust is also the story of those who survived and those who risked everything to help others escape the inevitability of the camps. While the Holocaust is one of the darkest chapters in world history, it contains some of the brightest pages. Those who experienced the Holocaust have stories to tell, stories that will inspire, horrify, and enlighten young readers. This book is written to honor not only those who perished during the Holocaust, but also the survivors and their supporters. We celebrate their lives and their acts of courage by promising to keep the message alive in the hope that this type of carnage will never occur again. No chapter in modern history has resulted in as resounding fame as the attempts of Adolf Hitler and the Nazis to annihilate European Jews and others to establish his Aryan master race. Most people on the planet have heard of the event, but few understand how it was allowed to happen. Here we explain. Following World War I, Germany was beat down by defeat. Having lost a war and in a large financial depression, businesses had failed and many were poor. Germany was a country in ruin. It was a country in need of direction and leadership. This void was filled by a failed postcard artist and house painter from Austria named Adolf Hitler. Hitler had served in the German army during World War I as a dispatch runner and was awarded the Iron Cross Medal. He was at the rank of corporal when his military career was ended by a blast of mustard gas, which left him temporarily blinded. During his time of temporary blindness and recovery, Hitler began to fall into the obsession and delusion that he was destined to be an Aryan hero who would lead and save Germany. When his sight returned, he became committed to this idea and joined with other veterans to form the German Workers' Political Party. This is also known as the Nazi Party. Hitler was a convincing speaker, and many people listened to what he had to say, and many believed in his ideas and plans for saving Germany. Many of his supporters were young men who were unemployed or had little experience in the military or working world. These men followed him with great allegiance, and Hitler began to use these groups of men to his advantage. Hitler had his followers dress in brown-shirted uniforms, and he created the Nazi flag with its well-recognized black swastika symbol. These symbols cannot be underestimated because they presented an impression of power and success for a nation that had otherwise been devastated by defeat. Hitler further fed the public's desire to rise to glory by bringing charges up against Jews, claiming, incorrectly, that they had bore the responsibility for Germany's past, present, and future problems. Many believed him. In the late 1920s Germany, the environment was perfect for a scapegoat. People wanted to blame others on the problems within the country. Prior to World War I, German Jews had been active, positive contributors to German society. Many Jews had distinguished careers in government, education, medicine, law, and the military. Their prominence and success fueled Hitler's hatred of them. Using this to his advantage, Hitler, with his delusions of power and might, plotted to seize or take political power by force. In 1923, he, with a mob of 3,000 followers, planned a revolution. Hitler's attempt failed, and he was imprisoned with a few of his main leaders. While this may have been a defeat, word spread of his imprisonment, and the news of Hitler's actions put him in the center spotlight. Hitler spent 9 months in prison, and while there, he published a book entitled Mein Kampf, which means My Struggle. And through this book, he was able to further the spread of his delusional ideas of grandeur and glory. Hitler continued to spread his ideas, give speeches, and gain followers in the years that followed. In 1932, Hitler ran for political office, but was defeated by a World War I hero, Paul von Hindenburg. Hindenburg saw the numbers of people who were following Hitler's ideas, though, and he gave him a political job, the position of Chancellor of Germany. Now with a high-ranking office, Hitler continued to spiral into his delusions against the Jews. Hitler used the deterioration of the German economy as material for his grand public orations. He lifted up the superiority of the Aryan, Euro-Caucasian people, and proposed simplistic solutions to the nation's problems. This gained Hitler tremendous public support. People who simply wanted their lives to be better became believers in the promise of Hitler's Nazi party. However, this promise also carried a threat, the threat to destroy anyone who did not conform to the image of Aryan superiority. If you were not of European descent, with Caucasian aesthetics, you were an enemy. Hitler's group of brown-shirted men also gained power. They were now referred to as stormtroopers, and it was their role to harass and torment anyone in political or ideological opposition to Hitler. They literally and figuratively beat Hitler's opponents into submission and eliminated his enemies. Many continued to follow Hitler out of fear. Within 3 months of his appointment to the office of Chancellor of Germany, Hitler began his organized reign of terror against the German Jews, which lasted until 1945. In 1933, Hitler directed a government-fueled boycott of Jewish businesses. This forced many German Jews out of a job. Although they made up less than 1% of the German population, Hitler continued to push through laws that would discriminate against the Jews. In the spring of 1933, German students, teachers, and others contributed to the Nazification of society by staging book burnings, or events where books written by Jews or books containing ideas contrary to Hitler's ideas were destroyed. The burning of books limited the amount of opposing information that the public could read, and thus shaped and further controlled public opinion. It was one of the first huge Nazi propaganda efforts, but certainly not the last. Hitler recognized that he needed to eliminate those who would oppose him and limit his citizens' information, their right to disagree, and by controlling what they saw or read, he essentially controlled what people began and continued to believe. In 1935, Nuremberg race laws were passed, stripping German Jews of their citizenship and rights. It also defined exactly what a Jew was. A Jew was defined by ancestry, regardless of religious beliefs. The Nazis identified a Jew as a person with 3 or more Jewish grandparents, or as someone who lived within a Jewish community after 1935 and had 2 or more Jewish grandparents. These laws also forced Jewish business people to register the goods in their shops, and between 1937 and 1938, over 80% of Jewish businesses were seized or forcefully taken over by the government. The laws forbid Jewish doctors to practice law and try cases in court. The laws forbid doctors to practice medicine on non-Jewish patients, and all Jews had to have their passports stamped with the letter J for Judah, or Jew. This limited travel opportunities and increased the harassment. On November 9, 1938, in a Nazi-encouraged rampage, 7,000 Jewish businesses were looted, 1,000 synagogues or Jewish places of worship were ransacked, 96 Jews were publicly murdered, numerous Jewish cemeteries, hospitals, and homes were destroyed, and 30,000 Jews were arrested. This became known as the Kristallnacht, or Crystal Night, or Night of Broken Glass. The concentration camps at Dachau and Buchenwald were created and expanded after this event to accommodate all of those that had been arrested. From the earliest days of Hitler's empire, called the Third Reich, the Nazis began to construct camps where they would imprison their enemies. Dachau was the first in 1933, Sachsenhausen in 1936, Buchenwald in 1938, Mauthausen and Flossenburg in 1938, Ravensbrück Women's Prison in 1939, and Auschwitz in 1940. These are just a few of them, but there are many more. These camps stretched all over the European continent, not only in Germany, but also in the Netherlands, Poland, and Austria. The camps served as work camps where slave labor fueled the Nazi war machine by producing vehicle parts or munitions, or death camps where Nazis destroyed their enemies. In September 1941, Jews over the age of 6 were required to wear a yellow Star of David badge or patch in public. This made Jews easily identifiable wherever they went and made them further subject to ridicule, harassment, and discrimination. In January 1942, the Nazi hierarchy met in Berlin for the Wannsee Conference, where Hitler's final solution was planned and discussed. This was Hitler's plan to kill all remaining living Jews in Europe. In 1941, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor, bringing the U.S. into World War II, and on June 6, 1944, the Allied powers landed in Europe in an event known as D-Day. This would prove to be the turning point of World War II, which would result in Germany's surrender on May 7, 1945. Hitler's Third Reich was defeated, and the concentration camps were freed, but surviving European Jews continued to struggle. For the survivors, few had homes or jobs or family to return to. Their pre-Nazi era lives were shattered, and few of the fragments remained. True survival for them was to create new lives, and to establish a home where they could be safe and free. While the physical horrors these people suffered can be retold, the mental anguish and psychological torture of their persecution created scars that time can diminish, but not totally heal. In today's world, there are horrible atrocities in every corner of the globe. We must be vigilant against and concerned about groups that advocate hatred and elimination of those that disagree with political and social ideas. Teachers, parents, youth leaders, and others in positions of influence have a special responsibility to teach young generations about these events in history, and to see that subsequent generations never forget what happened in Europe between 1933 to 1945, among other locations. A number of events, including the opening of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., the Holocaust Memorial Center in Detroit, the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam, the release of period-era films such as Schindler's List, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, and The Book Thief, and writings such as The Diary of Anne Frank or Elie Wiesel's Night have revitalized the concern of thoughtful adults that today's young people must learn about this terrible time. Reading about and experiencing literature and film of the Holocaust will provide young people with powerful insight about the realities of this time period. Through literature especially, readers can make personal connections with those characters, real and fictional, who lived or died during the period of the Holocaust. We live in violent and unsettled times. Children and young people are constantly reminded by the media of the tenuous nature of life on the streets. Critics say that our youth are numb or deadened to the pain that violence breeds. It's prevalent in video games, in movies, and advertisements all over our televisions and social media. We as responsible adults need to awaken a sense of revulsion and horror for all acts of violence and destruction. We should be horrified, saddened, and dismayed at the brutality these people have faced. While the events that occurred over 70 years ago in Europe may seem to be distant and unbelievable history for today's young people, the horror of these events cannot be ignored or forgotten if civilization is to endure. Each succeeding generation must know of these horrors and say, "Not again, not in our time." Survivor Elie Wiesel wrote of the Holocaust, "In those times there was darkness everywhere, in heaven and on earth, and all the gates of compassion seemed to have been closed. The killer killed and the Jews died, and the outside world adopted an attitude of complicity or of indifference. Only a few had the courage to care. Had those few not cared, we would live in a very different world, devoid of many freedoms and differences. The words 'never again' are words that need to be echoed by every generation."